Good morning, sixth grade. We are going to go ahead and start with the ancient Greeks. So we're on chapter 7. So let's go ahead and start with our chapter opener.
The story matters. In ancient times, Greek language, culture, and mythology spread throughout the Mediterranean region. Traditional figures, such as the goddess Athena, were featured in art and on pottery and other household objects. In time, ancient Greek civilization was absorbed by the more powerful Romans. Because the Romans imitated Greek culture in many ways, the achievements of the Greeks in politics, philosophy, and literature were passed on through the centuries. In this way, the ancient Greeks continue to influence Western civilization.
Okay, so our essential questions for this lesson are: how does geography influence the way people live? Why do people form governments? Why does conflict develop? And how do governments change? Okay, so you should have already watched the chapter opener video. So we're going to go ahead and continue on with chapter 7, lesson 1, Rise of Greek Civilization.
Lesson 1: Rise of Greek Civilization. It matters because the early Greeks developed important settlements, trade routes, and political ideas in the Mediterranean region. Mountains and seas. Guiding question: how did physical geography influence the lives of the early Greeks? Greece was the first civilization to develop in Europe and the westernmost part of Asia. In other early civilizations, people first settled in river valleys that had rich soil. Greek civilization began in an area dominated by mountains and seas. If you flew over this region today, you would see rugged landscapes and beautiful seas. The Greek mainland is on the southern part of Europe's Balkan Peninsula. A peninsula is a body of land with water on three sides. Far to the east of the Greek mainland is another peninsula called Anatolia. It is part of present-day Turkey. Between these two land areas are the dazzling blue waters of the Aegean Sea. The Aegean Sea is part of the larger Mediterranean Sea. There are hundreds of islands in the Aegean Sea. They look like stepping stones between the Greek mainland and Anatolia. The Greeks traded goods and ideas between islands and along the area's coastlines. Today, many Greeks fish and trade for a living, much as the ancient Greeks did before them. Other ancient Greeks settled in farming communities. These settlements began on narrow, fertile plains that ran along the coast and between the mountains. In the area's mild climate, farmers grew crops such as wheat, barley, olives, and grapes. They also raised sheep and goats. Even though some Greek communities were near the sea, others were far from the coast. Inland communities were separated from each other by rugged mountains and deep valleys. As a result, communities in many parts of ancient Greece became fiercely independent. They came to think of their communities almost as small, separate countries. An island civilization. Guiding question: how did the civilization of the Minoans develop? Greek myths describe an early civilization that developed on Crete, an island southeast of the Greek mainland. About AD 1900, a British archaeologist named Arthur Evans discovered a site on Crete called Knossos. He unearthed the amazing palace of a legendary king named Minos. Evans concluded that Minos and his family lived in the palace. The palace had numerous rooms that were connected by twisting passageways. Some of these rooms were used to store oil, wine, and grain. Other rooms were workshops where people made jewelry, vases, and statues. There were even bathrooms in the palace. An ancient people called the Minoans built the palace at Knossos. The Minoan civilization was the first to develop in the Aegean region, but they were not Greeks. Their civilization lasted from about 2500 BC to 1450 BC. Trade was an important economic activity for the Minoans. They built ships using the wood from Crete's forests of oak and cedar trees. The Minoans sailed to Egypt and Syria. There they traded pottery and stone vases for ivory and metals. Minoan ships also patrolled the eastern Mediterranean Sea to protect Minoan trade from pirates. Sometime around 1450 BC, however, the Minoan civilization collapsed. Historians do not know why this happened. One theory for the collapse is that undersea earthquakes caused huge waves that destroyed Minoan cities. Other historians think that people from the Greek mainland, known as Mycenaeans, invaded Crete.
All right, so over here you can see the picture that's placed here. It says this is the palace at Knossos. Included a large outdoor theater, colorful wall paintings decorated the palace, both inside and outside. This is kind of just giving you an idea of what the layout would have looked like.
A mainland civilization. Guiding question. How did the Mycenaeans gain power in the Mediterranean? About 2000 BC, the Mycenaeans left their homeland in Central Asia. They moved into mainland Greece. There, they gradually mixed with the local people and set up several kingdoms. Mycenaean Kingdom. Little was known about the Mycenaeans until the late 1800s. That was when a German archaeologist named Heinrich Schliemann discovered the ruins of a palace in Mycenae. He named the people of this civilization the Mycenaeans. Each Mycenaean king lived in a palace built on a hill. Thick stone walls circled the palace and protected the kingdom's people. Nobles lived outside the walls on large farms called estates. The workers and enslaved people who farmed the land lived in villages on these estates. Mycenaean palaces were centers of government. Artisans there made leather goods, clothes, and jars for wine and olive oil. Other workers made swords and oxhide shields. Government officials recorded the wealth of the kingdom's residents. They also collected wheat, livestock, and honey as taxes.
Sorry about that. So I just wanted to show you over here this picture. The Mycenaean artisans made golden masks to cover their faces of their dead kings. And this is known as the Mask of Agamemnon.
Traders and warriors. Minoan traders from Crete visited the Greek mainland. Gradually, the Mycenaeans adopted features of Minoan culture. They built ships and worked with bronze. They used the sun and stars to navigate the seas. The Mycenaeans also worshipped the Earth Mother, the Minoans' chief god. By the mid-1400s BC, the Mycenaeans had conquered the Minoans and controlled the Aegean Sea. This brought new wealth to the Mycenaeans, which they used to expand their military strength. The Mycenaeans were proud of their military successes in the Trojan War. A Dark Age. However, the Mycenaean civilization declined over time. Mycenaean kingdoms fought one another, and earthquakes destroyed their palace fortresses. By 1100 BC, the Mycenaean civilization had crumbled. About this time, groups of warring peoples moved from place to place throughout the eastern Mediterranean region. One of these groups was a Greek-speaking people known as the Dorians. They invaded the Greek mainland from the north and took control of most of the region. Historians call the next 300 years of Greek history a dark age. During this difficult time, trade slowed down, people made fewer things to sell, and most were very poor. Farmers grew only enough food to feed their families. Many people also stopped writing and keeping records. In Greece, several positive developments also happened during this time. Dorian warriors introduced iron weapons and the skill of iron making. Iron weapons and farm tools were stronger and cheaper than the bronze ones used by the Mycenaeans. As the Dorians pushed into Greece, thousands of people fled the Greek mainland. They settled on the Aegean Islands and the western shore of Anatolia. The Hellenes. By 750 BC, many descendants of the people who ran away returned to the Greek mainland. They brought back new ideas, crafts, and skills. Small independent communities developed under local leaders who became kings. These people called themselves Hellenes or Greeks. Farmers in these communities grew more food than their families could use. The Greeks traded their surplus food with each other and with neighboring peoples, such as the Egyptians and Phoenicians. As trade increased, a new need for writing developed. The Greeks adopted an alphabet from Phoenician traders who sailed from the Mediterranean coast. The Greek alphabet had 24 letters that represented different sounds. It greatly simplified reading and writing in the Greek language. Record keeping became easier. Soon, people wrote down the tales that had been told by bards or storytellers. Previously, these tales had been passed down from generation to generation orally. Now they could finally be kept in written form.
All right, so let's go ahead and take a quick look at this Greek alphabet here. It says click on this image of the Greek alphabet to see what your vocabulary words from this lesson would look like if they were written using the Greek letters. So I thought that would be kind of cool to see here for you. So you had peninsula, the Greek spelling here, and that's what it would look like. Again, Greek spelling, beta, alpha, rho, delta. So just kind of cool to look at to see what these would look like. So looking over here, obviously, pi, epsilon, nu, iota, you'd look over here and see pi, epsilon, and you could write them out like that.
Colonies and trade. Guiding question. How did early Greeks spread their culture? As Greece recovered from the Dark Age, its population increased rapidly. By 700 BC, local farmers could not produce enough grain to feed the growing population. To solve this problem, Greek communities began to send people outside the Aegean area to establish colonies. A colony is a settlement in a new territory that has close ties to its homeland. The Greeks founded many colonies along the coasts of the Mediterranean Sea and the Black Sea between 750 BC and 550 BC. Greek culture spread into new areas such as southern Italy, Sicily, France, Spain, North Africa, and Western Asia. The colonies traded with their parent cities on the Greek mainland. They shipped grains, metals, fish, timber, and enslaved people to Greece. In return, the Greek mainland sent wine, olive oil, and pottery to the colonies. As the Greeks began to make coins from metal, this affected their trade. Trade expanded as merchants traded money for goods rather than bartered for goods. This system increased a colony's wealth. As the demand for goods grew, artisans made more goods to meet the demand. People in different colonies specialized in making certain products. For example, in colonies where farmers raised sheep, people began to make cloth from the sheep's wool. Connections to today. Coins. The Greeks began making coins from silver in the 600s BC. Current American quarters and dimes are made of layers of copper and nickel and covered with a copper-nickel alloy or blend. Many American coins have symbols similar to ones used on ancient Greek coins. If you could create a new American coin, whose image would you place on it?
So here are some examples of some of the Greek coins here. And then here are some examples of some of the trade routes from the different colonies. And you can kind of look a little closer at that there.
The Greek city-state. Guiding question. How did Greek city-states create the idea of citizenship? Mountains and seas separated Greek communities from each other. As a result, people developed a loyalty to the community in which they lived. Communities became fiercely independent. By the end of the Dark Age, nobles who owned large estates had overthrown the Greek kings. Across Greece, nobles ruled numerous city-states. As in Mesopotamia, the Greek city-states were made up of a town or city and the surrounding area. Each city-state or polis was like an independent country. Today, English words such as police and politics come from the Greek word polis. What did a polis look like? The polis was the basic political unit of Greek civilization. At the center of each polis was a fort built on a hilltop. The hilltop that a fort stood on was called an acropolis. Local people could take refuge in the acropolis when invaders attacked. The Greeks built temples on the acropolis to honor local gods. Outside the acropolis was an open area called an agora. This space was used as a marketplace. It was also an area where people could gather and debate issues, choose officials, pass laws, and carry out business. City neighborhoods surrounded the agora. Just beyond the city were the villages and farmland that also were part of the polis. Because most city-states were surrounded by mountains and seas, they were usually small. Some were only a few square miles in area, while others covered hundreds of square miles. By 500 BC, nearly 300,000 people lived in the city-state of Athens. Most city-states, however, were much smaller. What did citizenship mean to the Greeks? Today in the United States, a person who is born here is considered a citizen. We owe many of our ideas about citizenship to the ancient Greeks. Who was a Greek citizen? Citizens were members of a political community with rights and responsibilities. In Greece, male citizens had the right to vote, hold public office, own property, and defend themselves in court. In return, citizens had the responsibility to serve in government and to fight for their polis as citizen soldiers. Ancient Greek citizenship was very different from that of ancient Mesopotamia or Egypt, where most people were subjects. They had no rights, no voice in government, and no choice but to obey their rulers. In most Greek city-states, only free land-owning men born in the polis could be citizens. They believed the responsibility to run the city-state was theirs because the polis was made up their property. Some city-states later ended the requirement of owning land for a person to be a citizen. Women and children might qualify for citizenship, but they had none of the rights that went with it. Citizen soldiers. In Greece, wars were fought by wealthy nobles riding horses and driving chariots. By 700 BC, citizens called hoplites made up the city-state armies. The hoplites fought on foot. Each heavily armed soldier carried a round shield, a short sword, and a spear. During battles, rows of hoplites marched forward together, shoulder to shoulder. They raised their shields above them to protect them from the enemy's arrows. This unified formation is called a phalanx. The success of the hoplites came from their pride in fighting as brave warriors. In Athens, for example.
So here is a picture here, a group of armed citizen soldiers in ancient Greece, arranged close together in rooms to form a phalanx.
Soldiers took this oath. Primary source. I will not disgrace my sacred arms nor desert my comrade, fellow soldier, wherever I am stationed, located, and I will observe the established laws and whatever laws in the future may be reasonably established. If any person seek to overturn the laws, I will oppose him. I will honor the religion of my fathers. From Athenian Thebic Oath, translated by Clarence A. Forbes. The polis gave Greek citizens a sense of belonging. This is similar to how people feel about their home estates today. The citizens put the needs of the polis above their own. Such strong loyalty to their own city-state divided the Greeks. They were not as unified as a whole country. This lack of unity weakened Greece, making it easier to conquer.